Bryce Young and Alvin Kamara are sneaky good fantasy plays this week. We get into the best sleepers and DFS plays for week 12 on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Fantasy Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we're going through our favorite sleepers of the week for Week 12. We'll give you each one quarterback, one running back, wide receiver, and tight end that we like as a sleeper this week. Then we'll get into our daily fantasy talk with PrizePicks, picks of the week, and our FanDuel lineup to close out this week's work and prep for Week 12. Let's get into our favorite quarterback sleeper of the week. Vinny, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going with Sam Darnold. I know it's a guy that's been up and down. He actually is buried well into the QB2s if you look at what his final numbers are. Because, again, the Seahawks are still a running team first. And I know they have a lot of yardage with Jackson Smith and Jigba and all that. But I think it comes together here, much like the Commanders game. They're playing the Titans on the road. This team is excellent on the road. Like, it's almost a better team overall when it's out of the West Coast, not playing in Los Angeles or Seattle. And they just have a great control here with Mike McDonald. They have great matchups for not only Jackson Smith and the Jigba, but some of these other receivers that I think will get going in this game. The Titans' defense just is terrible. The Seahawks are going to execute their game plan, be aggressive, throwing early, and turn the game over to Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet later in the game. It's an old school formula. It's working well for the Seahawks. They're not going to deviate from it. So I see the floor for Sam Darnold being 250 and 2 touchdowns after last week's absolute clunker against the Rams. That's a different defense, right? Rams defense on the road, a lot different than Titans defense on the road. I love Sam Darnold this week to give you a very good pocket passing day, and actually have him in the top 12 this week.
Very good. Yeah, I think he should have it can't get any worse than last week, that's for sure. Now, I'm going to go with Bryce Young, which I do not expect him to have a game like he had last week, but he gets another really great matchup. It's against the 49ers this week, but it's been overall pretty disastrous year for Bryce Young. In weeks 9 through 10 combined, he only scored 4.5 total fantasy points in those 2 weeks combined. But last week in Atlanta, so that was a road game, he put up 448 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And the 49ers defense, with all the injuries they have, they've just been bleeding points to both wide receivers, which we'll get to later, and the quarterback position. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points on average to quarterbacks this season. And 6 out of the last 7 quarterbacks to face the 49ers have scored at least 20 points against them. That's including CJ Stroud, Jackson Dart, Matthew Stafford, and Jacoby Brissett, who've all done it over the last 4 weeks. So it's always going to be risky to play Bryce Young. But in this matchup, I do think he's a playable guy if you need someone off waivers. Vinny, who do you got at running back for your favorite sleeper of the week?
Yeah, I do like Bryce Young in that game for sure. Even if he throws for 200 and a couple touchdowns, you're still paying off as a sleeper. And we know the 49ers really struggle right now with the pass rush and getting interceptions and all that. So I like that. But the one thing the 49ers do well is run the ball with great efficiency. And this game, I think, also tying to your sleeper pick of Bryce Young, should be controlled by the 49ers. So it's a great matchup, I think, for their offense with Brock Purdy, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. That means it's going to trickle down in the running game to Brian Robinson Jr. Now, he was getting significant work and scoring in a lot of weeks. Like, he could have been passed as a very sneaky flex play in a lot of leagues for just the scoring, right? You get the 6 points, you get a few more touches, and then you're in business. And he's looked really good. I think he's fit really well as the top backup for McCaffrey in this offense. He's, I think, just a little bit better of a finisher and a little bit stronger than they've had in other guys like Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell, right? He's just a little bit of a pop back that you can put in there. He's going to score those touchdowns in the red zone when the 49ers get in there. So I'm hoping And you should be hoping too, Michelle, for a 49ers blowout because you like the 49ers, you like Bryce Young. All those things say that Brian Robinson Jr. should be busy in the second half, and I think he scores this week to help put away the Panthers, and that makes him a good flex play this week.
Now, my guy has a much bigger name than Brian Robinson Jr. It's Alvin Kamara, but Alvin Kamara this year, outside of this last game before their bye, was like unusable for fantasy. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden in week 10, before their week 11 bye, he saw a season high 22 carries. Now, it wasn't like a monster game or anything. 83 rushing yards. He added 3 receptions for 32 yards. He still hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1. But if he continues to get that workload, and Tyler Shuck continues to be able to get the ball downfield and they can stay in this game, which I actually think the Saints will win this game against the Falcons. That's why I think it'll be a close.
Mm-hmm. So do I.
And Falcons have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. So nice matchup. I think Kamara will get the workload and be able to produce. So he's a solid low-end RB2 for me this week.
Yeah, I love Kamara this week. He might pop back up later in the show, so just pay attention to that. I think he's definitely a guy that is coming on. And hey, when the Saints play with the lead and Tyler Shuck puts them ahead, they can run the ball and stick with Alvin Kamara. Besides, there's nobody there. There's no more Brandon Cooks. There's no more Rashid Shaheed. There's basically Alvin Kamara, Juwan Johnson, and Chris Olave are the offense, and they need to touch the ball a lot. And Kamara, I think, will be a little bit busier in the pass game. Speaking of Rashid Shaheed, he just missed a touchdown last week. If Manuel Forbes, darn it, you have too long of arms. You knocked away the touchdown that Sam Darnold would have had to Rashid Shaheed on a deep shot. And I love Shaheed. He's got a lot of speed. I thought he's a great fit, obviously, playing Clint Kubiak's offense in New Orleans. He's playing it again in Seattle. This week they're going to Tennessee. Tennessee gives up a lot of big plays downfield, and they've been waiting for this field stretcher to try to destroy the top of a defense, right? With Jackson Smith and Najigba getting all the attention. Look, they got Cooper Kupp. They've had some flashes with Torrey Horton. Those guys haven't been able to stay healthy. Rashid Shaheed, did you know, Michelle, is the one guy that has 0 drops with the highest volume of targets this year. So he's Mr. Reliable on these longer bombs. He's not just getting just passes that are handed off to him, right, in the open field. He's getting some long shots. So I think Shaheed scores his first touchdown as a Seahawk this week in Nashville.
Now, I'm going with Xavier Legette to go with Bryce Young against the 49ers. Now, we love Tedero McMillan this week against the 49ers for sure, but I do think there's room for both of these guys to have a good game. There was last week against the Falcons. McMillan went off, but still Legette had 8 targets, 4 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. Now, it's extremely risky to play Legette because in all but 3 games this season, he has scored 2 or fewer fantasy points. So there's definitely a low floor. But he also has had 2 big games since week 7 with 19.7 points in week 7, 16.3 in week 11 and half PPR. And since week 5, the 49ers have allowed the most receiving yards and fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And in many games, it's multiple wide receivers in any given game having good games against the 49ers. So Tedero McMillan is top 10 for us this week, but I think Legette is a wide receiver 3 flex option if you need to plug someone in.
All right, so we both have stacks here. I have Darnold and Shaheed. You've got Young and Legette. By the way, down here in Charlotte, Dave Canales has said Legette needs more playing time here, so I think he's going to take over really as the number 2 ahead of Jalen Coker and some of these other guys. I think he's emerging much like Luther Burden is in the slot in Chicago, where don't look at the first half. There's going to be a lot more opportunities coming for these guys in high upside offenses in the second half. So I love that pick by you. I got to go with the low hanging Hunter Henry here for my tight end sleeper this week. They're playing the Bengals. Actually, Hunter Henry's been way off the radar. He's way down there beyond the tight end 15 in terms of average scoring and half point PPR this season. He just hasn't had a lot of looks because, darn it, the Patriots have found some receivers, and they're making it happen with Drake May throwing downfield. Drake May's not just, I need to check down and throw to the tight end and all that stuff. But this week, if Drake May is smart, he should find Hunter Henry streaking downfield, often available against the Bengals. Hunter Henry wasn't too bad last week in that tougher matchup against the Jets. He got a little bit more involved, so that's promising for this game. If Austin Hooper doesn't steal a touchdown or anybody random at tight end, Hunter Henry should deliver here. I'm going to call it 60 yards and a touchdown. one of Drake May's, probably 3 in this game against Cincinnati.
I have Hunter Henry as one of my picks of the week. So we'll be talking about him again shortly. My guy is the tight end in the other team in this game, Noah Fant for the Bengals against the Patriots. Noah Fant should be stepping into a bigger role with Jamar Chase suspended in week 12. Last season, when when T. Higgins was out for 5 games, at the time, Mike Gesicki was the receiving tight end instead of Noah Fant. And Gesicki scored at least 12 fantasy points in 3 of those 5 games that Higgins missed. And this is a good matchup for Fant. The Patriots are a good defense, but they do allow points to tight ends. They've allowed the 9th most fantasy points on average to tight ends this year. So I like Hunter Henry a lot. I like Noah Fant a lot. I like those picks by us. We are going to transition now to our daily fantasy talk. If maybe your team might be bad this year in redraft leagues and regular leagues and you want to shift over to some DFS, or you just want to join in a more fun, we'll get into our picks of the week and our FanDuel lineup to close up today's show.
All right, as Michelle told you, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump into the action. Again, we'll have our PrizePicks picks of the week coming up. If you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup. You can play anywhere PrizePicks operates. That includes California, Texas, and Georgia. There's a lot of good stuff here, especially when you're playing with the NFL, because one of your players leaves early with injury. The injury reboot will save your lineup from a loss. There's all kinds of good stuff. You can explore stacks as well, where you can look at multiple stats for one player. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play a first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, all caps, for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. All right, Michelle, let's get those PrizePicks picks right here. It was a pretty good week last week for sure. So let's dive into your first favorite prize pick that you got here, number 1.
Yeah, mine is Jameson Williams, more than 12.5 fantasy points. I can't believe his projection is that low. He has scored over 16 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. Over the last 2 games, he's combined for 207 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, and 43.6 fantasy points. The fantasy points on PrizePicks is full PPR, so that's even better. And he will face a New York Giants defense that has just been shredded by speedster wide receivers just like Jameson Williams. Over the last 2 weeks, Rome Odunze and Christian Watson both scored exactly 20.6 fantasy points apiece against the Giants. And then 8 receivers this year have scored 18 plus fantasy points against them. It was Quentin Johnson, Rashid Shaheed, Odunze, Watson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyquan Thornton, George Pickens, and Deebo Samuel. The one thing that majority of that group have in common is their ability to get open deep, which is Jameson Williams, main skill set there. So I love the more than 12.5 for Jameson Williams against the Giants this week.
Yeah, I love JMO, especially with Dan Campbell taking over the play calling. He's really made sure he gets him involved even more so than Amon-Ra St. Brown of late, which is very interesting. But it's a great matchup for sure against the Giants. I totally proved that. Now, Jalen Hurts, he's been averaging fewer than 30 rushing yards per game, which we didn't see because, again, they're not doing all the designed runs that they used to do with Hurts. Now, Hurts has gotten a lot of criticism. Unless you've been under a rock, people are ripping Hurts left and right. Teammates, coaches, observers, anonymously, some in public. But 28.5 rushing yards against the Cowboys. He actually had a nice game rushing against them in week 1, where he was above 60 yards there. And he hasn't run a lot, but I think in this game he will and take over. And look, Jalen Hurts was the nicest guy about all that criticism, but he feels it. He's going to come through. It's the Cowboys week. The Cowboys defense got a little bit better with Quentin Williams, but you can still run on them. So I like Jalen Hurts. I think he's going to take the game more into his control and hands and legs this week, and 28.5, more than that for the rushing total against the Cowboys.
Yeah, this is a huge week for Hurts and the Eagles in general to stay atop the NFC and prove that, they can compete on offense moving forward. But I'm going to go back to the Hunter Henry here. They have him more than 41.5 receiving yards. You talked about that, he hasn't been a great fantasy asset whatsoever, but he has had at least 45 receiving yards in 5 games this season. Again, he needs 42. And then including 2 of the last 3 weeks, he's had 51 yards in week 9, 45 in week 11. And the Bengals are allowing 81 receiving yards per game to the tight end position this year, by far the most in the NFL. They're one of just 2 teams allowing over 70 receiving yards per game. The other team is the Colts, who we'll get to in a moment with my other favorite pick. But in 3 of the last 4 games, Colston Loveland, Pat Freiermuth, and Darnell Washington had at least 67 receiving yards against the Cincinnati Bengals, with Loveland and Freiermuth each having over 110. So they're just giving up yards to tight ends like crazy. So I like Hunter Henry more than 41.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, it might have even gotten worse since Logan Wilson left and was traded to the Cowboys. So I don't know. Logan Wilson wasn't playing all that great, but they're not playing much better. Let's just say that. Now, I've got Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, I've been banging the table for Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's working his way. I'm not sure he's going to end up as the highest scoring player. He might if he has a finish like he did last year, but this dude should have gotten the ball a lot more against the Eagles, and he was just killing them. This week he gets the Giants. I'm going with this number, 110.5 combined rushing and receiving yards. It doesn't matter if they throw it to him short, if they run it to him. He's going to destroy the Giants this week. Like, I think this could morph soon. And forget St. Brown and Montgomery. This could morph into what kind of big plays are we getting from Gibbs and Williams this week? This could be this entire offense, right? I also said that they could score 50 for the second point in the season at home. They did against the Bears. They can definitely do it to the Giants. They just have to step on the gas, stomp on them this week. They need to. They lost last week. So 110.5. I don't care how he gets it. That's why I had it, because rushing, receiving, just put the ball in this guy's hands. If he gets 10 touches, Michelle, I'm going to call he gets this. That's all he needs.
Yeah, I'm really high on this Lions offense this week, and you're going to see that in my FanDuel lineup. Now, my last one is Travis Kelce, more than 52.5 receiving yards. I just talked about the Colts giving up the second most receiving yards per game to tight ends this season, behind only the Bengals. And Kelce has the second most receiving yards among tight ends this season, behind only Trey McBride. He's averaged 63 receiving yards per game this year. He only needs 53 for to have more than their projection on PrizePicks. And he's hit at least 53 receiving yards in each of the last 6 games, with over 90 receiving yards in 2 of the last 3 games, 91 yards this past week, with a season high 13 targets and 9 receptions against a tough Denver Broncos defense. And like I just said, the Colts are the second worst among tight ends, or against tight ends this year. So I really like Kelce this week, more than 52.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, I love that pick, and stay tuned. He might show up again later in the show. Yet another teaser from me on that. Now, let's look at Chase Brown for me as my third pick here. This is also receiving yards for a running back, 30.5 receiving yards against the Patriots. Now, Chase Brown has gotten involved a lot as a receiver of late. This is also going to be probably good for him game script wise, right? The Patriots should jump on the Bengals. They should have a lead here. The Patriots have really struggled and given up some receiving yards to backs. And the one guy that was like, okay, I need to find somebody kind of random that produced this, and Dylan Sampson was that guy. That they seem to just give it up to these guys. And partly is the game script, right? The Patriots just stomp on people. They just pull away with their offense with Drake May. So there's going to be enough checkdowns for me for Chase Brown. You also cannot run on the Patriots very well. So if they're behind and they need Chase Brown to play check down Charlie, they can do that in this game. So I love Chase Brown. Again, 30.5 receiving yards against the Patriots.
I'm happy to hear that, because I have him in my main league and I desperately need to win. And I was a little bit worried about Chase Brown. So happy to hear that you think he's going to have a good receiving game against them. We're going to transition to end today's show with our FanDuel lineup. Again, we do not know our lineups. Last week, we had a ton of the same guys. We'll see if that happens again right after a quick break. There's honestly nothing better than being at a live NFL game in the stadium, surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it can be very frustrating. That's why I always use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast and easy and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price, plus all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. And it's a super, super easy app to use. You can pull up Game Time, and in just a couple taps, you'll see amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100. So just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Let's get into our FanDuel lineup for Week 12. This will be on the main slate, so any of those primetime games are not available, unfortunately, for our love for that 49ers-Panthers game on Monday Night Football. But who do you have at quarterback, Vinny? Who did you go with?
Yeah, last week it was a clunker with Justin Herbert, but somehow, because we played Michael Wilson, Michelle, I did well with my lineup because he made up for a lot of stuff that a lot of people didn't produce last week. Now, Jalen Hurts, look, he's expensive. I'm playing him alone. I'm just going to say this. He feels alone on the Eagles offense. No one is supporting this guy. So I'm playing him alone to prove that he's going to put up some numbers, and also he will put up some numbers. 9,000, but I see him putting up 3x return. I think he gets 27 points or more. That's what we're looking for, 3x from our lineup to get where we want in the money in most tournaments and things that you're playing here. So I think go for 4x. That could happen for sure, but I think I'm going to get at least 3x here with Hurts. I like his running. I like his touchdowns. The Cowboys are the worst defense still against the pass and not very good either against the run. So I'm just going with Hurts in the best matchup for the quarterback this week.
I'm going with Jared Goff. I thought that's where you might be going as well, because I just expect this Lions offense to put up monster points. Now, maybe Gibbs and Montgomery take all the touchdowns, but I'm stacking Jared Goff with Jameson Williams, who I expect to have a monster day. Goff was at 8,000, and then Jameson Williams was at 7,100. So a nice price there for Jameson Williams to get that stack. I'm sure Amon-Ra St. Brown will have a good game as well, but I expect Jameson Williams to come down with a couple of really big plays that could just make him worth it right off of those.
Yeah, that's a good selection. I totally approve of the Jameson Williams one because I have him in the lineup as well. I have him as my wide receiver one based on price at 7,100. So I'm going with him. I might as well give you the rest of my wide receivers. Michael Wilson, look, I'm going to be loyal to Michael Wilson. You came through last week. You're still pretty affordable. I think people thought, hey, maybe there'll be a return of Marvin Harrison Jr. Did not happen. He had 29 points in this format last week. Again, he can get 18.9. If he has a drop off, he can get that 3x return. He's at 6,300. So I'm going with him there. And I mentioned him at the top as my sleeper. He's a perfect tournament dude because he's a big play dude. It's Rashid Shaheed against the Titans. He was super cheap at 5,800. I'm playing him. He's going to see the key targets from Jameson on the other side, right, with Darnold. So I really like that trio this week. A lot of big plays could be in this works here with that group.
Very good. Now, my other wide receivers are Darnell Mooney, who's stepping into that wide receiver one role with Drake London out. And then it's really Kirk Cousins, right? Is there Kirk Cousins and Darnell Mooney had a lot of good games together last season, and he was super cheap at 5,900. And then my most expensive wide receiver was Rashid Rice. I'm going to go with him. I know it was a bad week last week against the Broncos. I'm not worried about him bouncing back. And I'm not too worried about Sauce Gardner being on him. Like, Rashid Rice moves all over the field. He's in the middle of the field a lot. He's going to get a ton of targets, and he does seem to be the main guy that Mahomes looks for when they get around the end zone. So I paid up for him at 8,100. And in my flex, I also have a wide receiver, Kayshon Boutte, at 5,800. He's back, healthy, doesn't have an injury designation. Nice matchup against the Bengals. And Boutte's been scoring a lot of fantasy points as of late. So I'm going to trust him. And he was cheap at 5,800. So I went there.
All right, so I've got 3 receivers and a quarterback. I'm going to give you my other plays here at running back, and I'm playing running back in the flex. It is the aforementioned Alvin Kamara. I actually put him in the lineup last. I was surprised I could afford him. He was at 6,100. I guess his value is pretty cheap here this week. I mean, I think I can get 18.3 points from Alvin Kamara, so I like that. And for the first time since they were in Ohio State, I'm going with the backfield of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. here as my 1-2 punch of rookies. Henderson, obviously, smash spot, easy. He's going to be higher ownership here against the Bengals. Still pretty affordable, 7,500. Actually, a little bit more expensive is Quinshon Judkins at 7,700, but they're going to feed the heck out of Judkins. Shedeur Sanders is starting against the Raiders. You don't want to throw a lot against the Raiders. It should be a low scoring, competitive game where the Browns are not falling behind, and Judkins should get a lot of touches this week. So I really feel much better about Judkins out rushing Ashton Genty, mainly because he's not facing the Browns defense this week. So I love Judkins, Henderson, Kamara at that value here. So really a lot of values that allowed me to go pay up for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I do like those picks. I definitely considered Judkins, but I decided to go with Travion Henderson, even with Ramondre Stevenson possibly
Yeah.
coming back. I don't care. Such a good matchup against the Bengals, and Henderson has been
Yeah.
destroying it, so they should stick with him. 7,500, not a bad price. And then Kenneth
Yeah.
Walker at 7,200. He is getting a little bit more work. The coaches have come out to say he's earned more work, and he finally got some goal line work this last week. And it's a nice matchup against the Titans, so I expect him to have a good game. And then at my tight end, I do have 3 Patriots in this lineup. That's a little nerve-wracking, but I went with Hunter Henry against the Bengals as well. I mean, the Bengals defense is so bad that all 3 guys can have good games, and Henderson, Booty, and Henry. I went with him. We know the Bengals are so bad against the tight end, and he was really cheap at 5,300.
Yeah, I guess I diversified my portfolio because I have no repeat players except for I guess one, but I'll mention that in a minute. But I have Travis Kelce, the other guy that we talked about at tight end, so I was able to afford him. I like the price as well. He should be the key target against the Colts here. Rashid Rice hopefully can get going inside if they can move him away and he can produce for you as well. But I don't think it's going to be good for Xavier Worthy, so I think it has to be the Rice Kelce show for the most part. I like Kelce quite a bit. And then my one stack is the Browns defense with Judkins. I think they were a nice price this week. I get the Raiders, who are interception machine. You could go on the other side if you're really feeling it in leagues to the Raiders against the Browns versus Shedeur. But I want to go a little safer. I have the money. Let's do it. Let's go to the Browns defense with Myles Garrett. By the way, coming off a massive sack game last week. So I love the Browns to force some turnovers from the Raiders this week.
Yeah, I do too. Normally, I stay away from the Browns on the road, but in a matchup against the Raiders and Geno Smith, I like that. I ended up having enough money to go for the most expensive defense, and it was the Seahawks against the Titans.
Ooh.
I mean, the Seahawks, even against the Rams last week, their defense was still good. They only allowed 21
Yeah.
points to the great Rams offense. The Titans can't score anything. Worst offense in the league, and the Seahawks will get turnovers and sacks against Cam Ward. So 5,000, I had the money, so I might as well pay up for that. To recap my lineup, I got Jared Goff at quarterback. My wide receivers are Jameson Williams, Darnell Mooney, Rashid Rice, and Kayshon Boutte. Running backs Travion Henderson and Kenneth Walker. Tight end Hunter Henry, and my defense is the Seahawks.
All right, I have Jalen Hurts not playing with any of his disloyal teammates. Sorry, he's playing by himself this week with quarterback, and then I got Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, the Ohio State reunion in the backfield with Alvin Kamara on the side, Rashid, Shaheed, Michael Wilson, Jameson Williams as wide receivers, Travis Kelce at tight end, and then my one stack Browns defense with Judkins.
That is it for today's episode. I hope we all got you prepped for week 12 to win your fantasy lineups. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back on Monday to recap everything that happened in week 12. Have a great weekend, y'all. Bye.